Alright guys, what is going on? Fish King Fishing here, and we are going to be bringing you a new series today on the channel. Now the new series is called Best Baits, and it's pretty simple. We're just going to go over the best baits I think personally for the fish that I fish for. And so today we are going to be going over smallmouth bass baits, and I think next week is going to be largemouth bass baits, although there's not as much largemouth activity up here where I fish in Pennsylvania. So I'm not as solid of an angler for largemouth, but I do know quite a bit about smallmouth. And so with that being said, we're going to get right on into it. Alright guys, so the bait that we are showing you here, this is a white curly tail. Some people call it a white grub, but I prefer to call it a white curly tail. And the main reason it's called a white curly tail, as you can probably guess, it has a nice white curly tail on the end. Now this is a 4-inch white curly tail, and so the grub body on it is a little bigger, a little thicker, and a little fatter. But I do prefer to use a 4-inch over a 2-inch because this is a 2-inch here, and you can see not that fat, not real thick, and the tail is not that not as big as the other one, I should say. So these guys are really simple to fish with. All you have to do, you can use any kind of jig head you want to, as long as it's weighted. You want to put some weighted jig head through it, and you just feed the grub body right until you get above the tail, and then right there, as you can see right there above the tail, is where you'll want to have the jig head hook come out. And you just you can cast and retrieve this, and it'll come through the water, and it'll get some action on that, get the fish attracted, and it looks really nice whenever it's coming through the water on a cast and retrieve. But you can also opt out and use this as a jig. If you put a jig head on it, you can, if you sight fish, if you see fish in there and you think, oh, maybe I can get them, you could drop it in front of them and jig it, and the curly tail motion will probably get them with the jig body. But mostly I use them on cast and retrieve, or if I'm going up a river in my boat, I might put it on and troll with it while I'm going up to my spot that I want to fish at. But these are really versatile. You can catch more than just bass on these. I've caught smallmouth bass, I've caught rock bass on them. I've even caught some really nice sized bluegill on them, believe it or not. And I think for the bluegill I might have been using a 2-inch, which, put it on there. You can see the 2-inch, it's not a bad sized, but I prefer to use the 4-inch just because it's a little bigger, and a little bit of a bigger bait's going to get you a bigger fish. So yeah guys, that is the curly tail, the white curly tail, and they do make it, I have some in some different colors here. You can see this one is a yellow one, and it is a curly tail, and it comes in different colors. They're a really versatile bait, and so I highly recommend you guys go and pick them up. They're only like $2 or $3 in a pack, and the ones that I'm showing you here are made by Yum, and they have really high quality curly tails, and so I say you guys should go pick some up. Alright guys, so we are moving on to the next bait, and I'll put this next bait up on the cup there. As you can see, this next bait is actually a white tube jig, but just tube jigs in general I've found are really good for smallmouth bass. On my river we don't get huge smallmouth bass, I think I've already said that. So these tube jigs do really well. They can catch anywhere from a little tiny dink of a smallmouth bass to a really nice sized smallmouth bass, and they catch anything in between really. I've caught crappie, perch, I've caught sunfish, bluegill, and smallmouth bass on them, and just on the white. And I would recommend going with white personally. White is like a generally good color for jigs. And I think it just shows up better in the water, and it's easier for the fish to see. So definitely pick up some white tube jigs. They do make them in all different colors here. I'll put a couple colors up there, and you can see that is a yellow and white. And this is kind of hit or miss. Sometimes you will catch fish on the yellow one, and then other times you'll go out and you won't have even a single bite on a yellow tube jig. So it all just depends. They make them, like I said, all different colors. I'll come back to this one. It's orange and neon green, and it's got a really funny story behind it. So I'll come back to that one, but I would recommend picking some of those up. They're pretty good. And then these two colors, I would say, are more or less colors to avoid. This is a pink, a bright pink and white, and I just have never caught a fish on it. I've really tried with them, and I've never caught a fish on it, so I don't think they're that good. And then these black and neon green, I've only caught a handful on these, and I've fished this a lot. And especially when I know there's crappie right in front of me, and they seem to gravitate towards the white a lot better than this. Now that's not to say that it could be water conditions or something like that, but I would recommend steering away from these two if you can. If you get them in a pack, it's no big deal. They will catch some fish, but these two, I would say, are the colors to avoid more or less. They don't really work like the other ones do. And so now I should show you guys. This is one of my old go-tos that I used last season. Now it's probably 2 or 3 years old, and that just shows how versatile these things are. So really, just to rig it up, all you're going to do is just take a weighted jig head like this. You just go down through the body, bring it out right at the base of the skirt there, and you're good to go. And then when you're fishing them, you can... I wouldn't really cast and retrieve. You could if you brought a little jig with it, but really what I do is I just kind of cast it out, and then I just jig it back, and that gets that skirt flailing there, and it kind of gets some movement there, brings the fish's attention to it, and then they're more likely to bite. So we'll go back to this one. And this orange and neon green skirted tube jig, it has a really funny story behind it. So it was last summer, actually, towards the end of summer. I was getting ready to go into 2 days. It was one of the last trips that I was going to get to take fishing, one of the last outings I was going to get to take before 2 days started, and then I would be pretty much done. And so it was me and my dad, and we're fishing our local river, and we're really going for bass at this point because the spawn and stuff was going on, and at this point in time, all the bass seemed to be biting. So we had tube jigs on, and we were more or less just going for whatever we could catch. And so there's this one little spot along a river, and it's got a curve to it, and on that curve, it's kind of like a little inlet. It kind of goes back in a little bit, and there's a tree laying there. So I casted this little orange and neon green tube jig. I'm not sure if it was that exact one, but I casted that same type. And I casted it right by that tree, and I started jigging. And on the way back through, I actually hooked up on what I thought was a really nice fish. And I could just tell by the way it felt when I was reeling that it was a really nice fish. And so I reeled in, got it in after a couple minutes of fighting it, and got a hold of it, and I actually got a good look at it. And it was a nice rainbow trout, believe it or not, which is kind of a little strange. Trout don't generally bite tube jigs like that. But for whatever reason, this one did. And it was probably about a 13 or 14 inch rainbow trout. I'm not 100% certain. It's been a little while. But it was a really nice trout. And it was kind of a little bit of a surprise to me because I was not expecting to catch that. But that was probably the highlight of that day, was catching that. And so these things are very versatile, like I've already mentioned. That just goes to show you almost anything will bite on a little tube jig. And it's all about finesse with these guys. You just kind of have to figure out how to work them. And once you get the technique down, I should say, then it gets pretty easy to fish them. And it's really not even that hard to fish them. You honestly just hook them up and then jig them through the water. And different guys get it done different ways using these. I just cast it out and slowly reel back and just kind of give it a little jig every now and again. Give it some motion. If there's a fish I see laying in front of me, drop a little tube jig in front of it, jig a little bit. Sometimes you can get them to bite out of aggression. So that's the tube jig. Now we're going to move on to Senkos. Alright guys, so the next bait we are moving on to is the Senko. And this is the universal bait, I should say. Most guys use these going after largemouth, but you can use them and get smallmouth. I've done it before, and it's not really, they're really simple to fish. They're not hard to fish at all. So basically, a little bit of overview of a Senko. It's just a worm imitation, honestly. It's really just a worm imitation, and they're made out of soft plastic. So you can rig these up several different ways. You can Texas rig them, drop shot, Ned rig, wacky rig. Wacky rig is probably the most common and the way that I do it, typically. And so when you wacky rig, really all you want to do is just kind of grab the middle of the worm. So the middle of the worm's like right there. And I just thread the worm down onto my hook. And that's a wacky rig. And whenever it's coming through the water, it's just kind of give that little motion. And it'll attract the fish, and the fish will bite it. Now these do come in several different colors and several different brands. Right now I have mostly Strike King, and I do like the Strike King ones. I think they're every bit as good as a Yamamoto, every bit as good as a Yum Dinger. And I do have Yum Dingers too, though. I will get out a Yum Dinger, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But we do have, this is an old Yamamoto, and probably 2 years old, and it's just not even heavily used, honestly. This was not like heavily used. It's not that it was, it's not that it's just crazy old. It's only a couple years old, which I guess that probably is a little older for these things. But I just think the price of the Yamamoto Senkos are just insanely expensive compared to some of the other ones. And so I decided to go a little bit of the cheaper alternative. The Strike King ones, they come in all different colors. You can see this one has red flakes in it. It's red with red flakes. This is a black and like a purple color imitation. And then we've got your classic watermelon color, which is good for just about any water conditions. And can't forget this one. This is another watermelon on the front, and then it's got some neon green on the back. And so really, those are really simple. And the other rigs we'll get into later, and probably in the next video or a couple videos down the road. We're going to go over the different rigs, and that's the plan. But these are the Senkos. They're decent little baits, but I'd have put them number 3 because smallmouth will tend to take smaller baits before they're going to take a huge worm like this. So you could get smaller sized worms and you would probably have better luck. But these do catch smallmouth, and they are a pretty efficient bait. They will catch other bass as well. I'm trying to see here if I have any yum dingers actually in my tackle box at the moment. And it looks like I don't. I've got all kinds of finesse worms and trick worms. But I even have some of the regular cream worms. These guys here. These work too, actually. These are pretty much the same thing, just a natural color and not quite as thick. So I guess I don't have any of the yum dingers in this tackle box. But basically, my complaint about the yum dingers is I had a yum dinger and I bought a couple packs of them, and they were watermelon with a neon green chartreuse dyed tip. And I had them in my tackle box for maybe, I don't even know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, max. I bought them towards the end of the season, and when I took all my stuff out of my tackle box, started going over everything I had in inventory, I actually realized that the chartreuse tip had actually faded just from being out in the sun. And so I personally kind of think that's crappy. 2 to 3 weeks and your bait's no good anymore. And I've only thrown like 2 of them. I've only thrown 2 of those yum dingers, and all of them are that way. All of them are faded, and so I would recommend probably going Strike King first. The only thing I will say about Strike King is you do have to watch. If you would, for whatever reason, be waiting and you happen to have these in your pocket or in your tackle box with other worms, this red will wear off. It does wear off a little bit. It's nothing crazy, but it has worn off onto a couple of the other worms in my tackle box, but it's not really going to affect the overall quality of them. I still support them, and I still support the yum dingers. I just wish that maybe they were a little better quality, but maybe that's why you should buy the Yamamoto Senkos, because they are going to hold up a little longer. And I guess another trick I should say, you can see when I wacky rigged this one, I just hooked right through the worm. Some guys will take an O-ring and slide it down the worm, and there's different tools to get that that you can get that done with. But then they hook underneath the O-ring, and I've done it that way before, and it saves your worm. It kind of gives it a little longer shelf life, if you will, and so you can use it more often. But really, you can see I hooked this one through the middle, and there's only a small amount of damage there to it. So really, they have pretty good quality stuff. Strike King does a pretty good job. And so those are the 3 baits, guys, that we're going to go over. So thank you guys for watching. Alright guys, thank you for watching. I hope you guys learned some stuff and you're able to apply it when you go to fish next time. Please go follow my Instagram account, at FishKingFishing. You're going to get updates about the channel, different pictures from fishing adventures that I've taken with me and my friends, my family. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, guys. And stay tuned for next week. We're going to go into the best live baits for trout.